Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's day 561 of this Growing Giant Bangkok Guava from Cutting series. This episode spans an incredible amount of time over 1 year, going all the way from day 556 to 937. And as you can see here, I had to tie with green nylon string all of these unruly offshoots to the balcony rail to give this plant some sort of structure so everything wouldn't fall over. These leaves are exceptionally big and they just keep getting bigger. You'll be hard pressed to find leaves this big anywhere in the world, and that's because of the conditions that I provided for this guava cutting. It's not by choice, but this balcony receives very little sunlight for a few months out of the year during the late spring and summer. So as you can see, the bark is busting open. That means the base of the stem, the trunk, is thickening, which is great news. But what we really need is for bark to start forming on all of these offshoots so they can support their own weight. And as you can see here, these leaves are up to 7 inches or 17.8 centimeters long. That's phenomenal. And normally they're supposed to be much smaller than this. So this is a sucrose solution. The idea here was to spray it on the backs of all of these leaves, the undersides, so that the sucrose, which is the main form of sugar transportation within a plant, to just absorb directly in through the holes, the stomata, which are the little holes in which gaseous exchange occurs between the atmosphere and the plant. So carbon dioxide, oxygen can go in and out. So day 575, it's really hard to tell with a plant that was already growing so robustly whether there was a difference from spraying that sucrose or not. And the verdict after about a week or two was that it didn't really make a difference because I examined I believe I had 6 different plant species at the time, 6 different plant series going on, and I didn't really see any difference or anything that was noticeable that could justify making a big sugary mess like that and putting in all that extra work. So I'm back to chemical fertilizer. As I've said many times in the past, I just use Miracle Grow and crushed vitamin powder, and that complements each other and provides for all the nutrition a plant needs. You can see some little green buds at the base of the stem there. I think those are just backups. So I film pretty much every week during this time period, and I ditched the nylon string that you just saw for a 3mm coated aluminum craft wire instead. And this craft wire has been pretty amazing. I can shape it to however I want, whatever needs I need at the time, depending on how long these offshoots get and what directions they start bending over from their own weight in. And the wire doesn't seem to rust. It's very thick and rigid, which is much better than just using string. So if you ever need to give your plant some structure, I heavily recommend buying some off of Amazon or whatever, or going to a store and buying some. So this leaf is almost 8 inches 20 centimeters long. That's phenomenal. That's pretty much the biggest leaf I've ever had. And if you look at plants growing in orchards and pictures on Google, you'll never see anything that big. So the theory is that plants that grow in the shade and have very limited access to sunlight can grow very big leaves like that. I have a catalpa tree video from many years ago which shows giant leaves, and I went back many years later with a friend, and the leaves on that very same tree were just pathetically small. So something happened, the conditions were not right, but when conditions are right, you can get these giant leaves, and it's aesthetically very pleasing, but at the same time, I'm not sure that it's great for the plant. I can't speak for that catalpa tree growing in the wild in the mountains, but in this case, for my balcony for this apartment, growing conditions were fairly poor due to the lack of sunlight all the way from, I believe, sometime in April all the way until late August. On day 596, I was once again measuring these giant Bangkok guava leaves. They're huge and mesmerizing. I'm actually giving this plant cutting away to my friends. They have a house with a small yard, and that'll be a real interesting experiment to see how this adapts to being planted in the actual ground. So this one's almost 8 inches or 20 centimeters. That's phenomenal. You'll probably never see a leaf this big online or offline. So it's day 625. Like I said, I gave this away, so I'm filming this at their house. So my friend pruned the guava to my dismay because I really didn't want to see all those giant leaves get cut, but it seems like this plant is just wilting and burning up. Anyway, August and September are the hottest months in San Diego, California, USA, where we live. And you can see the cut mark where my friend pruned away. You can see multiple cutting points. So this used to be a lot taller, but it was probably a good move in hindsight anyway, because these leaves are just way too big. And for a plant that was denied of sunlight, direct light, for more than 4 months, this is what happens when you move the world's biggest guava leaves into direct sun all day, every day. And I did do some digging underneath to see if there's just wood chips and potting mix. And I'm actually going to take a brief interlude here to show you how a fiddle leaf fig fares in an indoor environment with no sunlight. I know these things can do pretty well in low light, but in this fluorescent, basically no light environment with potting mix, that's what happens. It's day 695. The giant leaves are all toast, but there's finally some new growth after 3 months of relative inactivity post-transplant. So you can see the offshoots are all growing upwards. There's gravitropism. They're growing against the direction of gravity, generally speaking. And that reminds me a lot of those Joshua trees that I showed you clips of from Joshua Tree National Park in my Joshua Tree series, where trees that were bowed over or just bent over or nearly fall into the ground would sometimes sprout offshoots at every node like this going upwards. So it's very interesting to see how all trees can respond like this. Maybe it's not all trees, but I've seen so many examples in different species online and in person that I believe that to generally be the case. So it's a tale of two sets of leaves essentially. You have the old guard, the 7 or 8 inch leaves that are burned to a crisp, and all these new leaves that no doubt are adapted to this full sun environment and have a much higher tolerance for direct sunlight. The very broad leaves, the 7 or 8 inch leaves, the 6 inch leaves, 5 inch leaves probably have a very high concentration of chloroplasts filled with chlorophyll, and that's why they burn. So 7 months later, on day 897, you can see all the old foliage has been replaced. But that's not to say that the new foliage is all necessarily healthy. You can see some leaves here that have that purple tinge and some spots on them that don't look healthy. Those were probably harmed by frost damage over the relatively mild San Diego winter. It rarely gets to freezing. There's almost never any snow here. Sometimes there'll be very brief hailstorms that melt and evaporate very quickly. And that's about it. But you will have nighttime temperatures that can harm a tropical plant like this. So you will see a little bit of damage, but if you look at these leaves here in this center mass, or more towards the right, they're all healthy. So that's a good sign. They were probably regenerated as well after winter had passed. So things are looking up. This thing is almost getting as tall as the fence. It's day 911. As you can see, these offshoots, these little branches that are all nearly parallel to the ground, they're trying to regenerate as well. There's some damage over there. And yeah, I don't really hope that these do well, actually. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, these can just be clipped off because they're all growing in the wrong direction. They're a lost cause. And the bark's already formed, so they're not going to correct themselves very easily. You can see a little offshoot there where the bottom 4 leaves are damaged, and then there's new ones. You can see a flower in the background. It was in the lower right for a brief moment of this footage. So I think this thing could be close to flowering en masse pretty soon, and perhaps, perhaps giving a fruit or two. But we'll wait and see. For now, it's just more foliage growth. And yeah, that thing can just be clipped off. It really doesn't contribute anything. So this plant is getting more and more upright. That means it's finally able to sort of support itself. This main trunk is not much of a trunk, but at least with all that pruning and dying back and respawning of leaves, this plant is finally on the right track. I know it's being supported with various plastic implements and ties down there on the base, but this is a flower that's been shed, and it looks like there might even be a fruit developing as we speak. So this might be one of those species where the flower only lasts for 1 or 2 days. Granted, I don't come over to my friend's house typically more than once a week, so I might have just missed the windows. I mean, these flowers could last for a few days, but I think if that were the case, I would have seen more than just a wilted husk of a flower here and there. So here's a close-up of one of these wilted flowers, and I'm hoping that that can maybe develop into a fruit. And here's that other one. So there is a considerable bulge beneath the flower. So I'm hoping that that might be a little guava fruit on its way. So it's day 931. I'm definitely not expecting any of these guava fruits, if we get any this year, to be big to the point where they're comparable to anything I've ever eaten in Asia when I was little. And if we just get some small fruits, sort of modestly like the honeydew, that's really all I can expect. My very first growing series where I got a 3 small honeydews at the end. They're nothing compared to what you see in supermarkets. So I'm thinking when you have a plant like this or a cutting that's getting ready to fruit for the first time ever, it's going to be something very modest, because something with branches this thin can't support a heavy, full-on sized guava fruit anyway. So I think that could be another flower or fruit, hopefully. I think that's just a flower that hasn't bloomed yet. So this thing doesn't have the structural support. It doesn't have enough foliage to support the growth of a very large fruit. So like with my honeydew experience, and wow, we have a fruit here on top. So it's been 11 months since the transplant. I know 11 months is a long time in its own right, but I wasn't expecting this thing to go anywhere after all of the damage it took. And it seems to have recovered very well in this full sun, being planted in the ground. And it took a while to reestablish the root system and finally grow a healthy root system. But this thing is taller than the fence now. So it's growing pretty fast. The leaves being big is actually not a great sign. It means there's just a huge deficiency in the sunlight. But we actually have a fruit. So here's a close-up of it. It's got some spider webs on top. And I'm hoping it gets bigger, but like I said, I don't know how much weight this branch can support anyway, so maybe it won't get bigger. And if it doesn't get bigger, then it's kind of questionable as to whether this is even a giant Bangkok guava cutting, or is it one of those Mexican or South American, Central American varieties. So if we slice this open after it becomes ripe and there's pink inside, then we know we have one of the Central American cultivars intended exclusively for juicing. If there's white fruit flesh inside, then we know we have the giant Bangkok guava. It's just that this cutting is in its first cycle of fruiting and thus can't support fruits much bigger than a ping pong ball in size due to the size of all these branches and how many leaves there are. So here's some more flower primordia. I would say there's about 6 to 8 of these scattered throughout the plant. So at this point, I'd like to wrap up this plant growing series. I've already gotten 2 fruits and possibly 6 to 8 more on the way from the looks of all of these developing flower primordia. And not only that, my friends are moving to a new house, so pretty soon I won't have access to this yard. We're leaving this guava cutting behind for whoever comes here in the future, and hopefully they'll get to enjoy some great guava fruits, full-sized ones, starting in maybe 2022. Thanks for sticking with my YouTube channel and this plant growing series for almost 3 years.